So, welcome back to my channel, as they say. So today I'm going to do a little thing on what I'm going to call something like the flaw or a flaw in Jordan Peterson's critique of postmodernism. Now, this is not, a comprehensive critique, and in fact, I think a great deal of the way in which Peterson responds to the postmodernists is correct. But there is one argument that he makes fairly regularly, which I think is a flawed argument, and it's flawed not only because I think it's kind of wrong, and more importantly, this is the point, but an even bigger problem is that it fails to really push the postmodernists where I think they need to be pushed. But you can tell me what you think. And there is kind of an irony to this because, of course, famously, Peterson has been critical of others, such as the materialist atheists like Dawkins and Sam Harris, for being insufficiently evolutionary in their way of thinking through certain issues. So I'm aware that this is an irony that I'm suggesting that Peterson does the same thing in this particular case. So the issue at hand then is when criticizing postmodernism, Peterson will often note that the postmodernists are inclined to reduce everything to being power hierarchies, which is true. They do that. But then Peterson's response to that is to say, well, hold on a second. He doesn't deny this power hierarchies, but he says, but not everything's a power hierarchy. There are other kinds of hierarchy, and the most common example he gives are competence hierarchies, right? Hierarchies where people are rated, on the hierarchies, are stacked on the hierarchy in terms of how competent they are at something. You can think of, great achievements, great achievers in science or the arts or whatever, right? Can be, the greatest author, the greatest filmmaker, who's the greatest writer, who's the greatest physicist, whatever, right? I mean, people, climb these hierarchies of success and competence. Now, and again, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying that's not true. Of course, there's competence hierarchies, right? But is that the right answer to give to the postmodernists in response to their claims about power hierarchies? I'm not sure it is, right? I mean, it kind of comes down to what one means by power, and I think that like for instance, if you look in the dictionary, I mean, there are different dictionaries, obviously, and give different definitions, but generally, I did some searches, and it seems to me there's like two basic definitions. There's often a variety of definitions, but they can usually be bunched into two sets, right? Two particular categories. So on the one hand, the power used to refer to having some kind of ability. So the power of speech, right, or willpower, or being able to do something, being able to act in the world in some way, right? Power is used this way, and of course the other way it's used is to refer to, in some way or another, to refer to the idea of having control over other people. So I think it's fair to suggest that when the postmodernists are talking about power hierarchies, you could say that both these things are coming into play. I mean, certainly I think they're assuming that people are taking deliberate actions to climb the hierarchy, but the claim is that the reason they're doing this, the reason they're taking these actions and trying to climb the hierarchies of power, is the second meaning, to get control over other people, and this is what particularly disturbs them. Particularly because of this, as Peterson correctly observes, the sort of Marxism that they sneak in the back door. They're troubled by this idea that people might be being exploited, or some kind of social group is dominating another. Classically class, but of course in modern cultural Marxism, class has become supplemented, if not displaced, by other kinds of things like sex and race and so on. So this is the claim they're making. Now, My response to that is that yes, that's true. There's these power hierarchies are everywhere, right? The postmodernists aren't wrong about that. The problem isn't being wrong. The problem is being insufficiently comprehensive in thinking through what all this is about, right? So, I mean, why would people want control over other people? Right? I mean, we take it for granted. It doesn't seem like a question that needs needs to be asked or is worth asking, but really it is. I mean, why would anyone want control over anyone else, right? Well, the reason to understand why these power hierarchies exist, why people might want control over others, you have to go back a step further. These, in evolutionary biology, we would say that these power hierarchies are proximate explanations. We need an ultimate explanation, and that's why we turn to evolutionary biology, because at the foundation of what human beings are, what life is, and how it acts, is explained in evolutionary terms. So, I mean, the multi this I just did another video just a bit ago about this whole thing called the evolutionary biology of farm animals. So you might want to refer to that if you want a more thorough explanation of what I'm about to say. I'm really going to give the short version here, but I mean, basically we are as multicellular organisms are technologies that have been produced by genes with certain kinds of structures and behaviors. And those technologies have been sustainable as a consequence of evolutionary pressures, molded from those evolutionary pressures to the degree that they've allowed the genes to perpetuate into future generations. It's all about reproduction, right? We're evolved to reproduce, and everything else is just part of the apparatus of getting to reproducing, right? That's why we exist. And people don't want to hear that, and we can do other videos about this and about the confusion around this. But the fact of the matter is, we exist purely to reproduce. That's why we've been molded by evolution, because we've been successful reproducers. That doesn't mean we can't do other things. I may actually do a video about the myth of Sisyphus, which I think nicely applies to this problem here, but that will be coming in the future. So it's this need to reproduce that makes us want to have control over others, because everything in a social species is kind of under contention all the time, right? There's struggle over resources, and the greater control we have over any particular situation, the more we're able to enhance our own capacity to gain access to the relevant resources. And of course, the primary resource, of course, is mating partners, right? I mean, first of all, we want to be able to mate. I mean, this is particularly a problem for males, of course. It's across species, not just human, right? Across species, mating is a problem for males. A lot of males, in fact, most males and most species don't mate at all. So just finding a mate is the first one, and then you want to find a good quality mate, right? So that's so the mating resources is the first issue, right? But then there's other things. There's other things that can enhance your ability to attract mates. So control over material resources can be a powerful attractor to mates, particularly to good mates. And when I say good mates, I mean particularly healthy or have other qualities that are going to be good vehicles for our genes to move into future generations, right? All acting from this sort of selfish chain analysis. So, control material resources is important, but there's other, especially among social species, there's other kinds of resources, things like status and prestige, right? These are other kinds of things, right? If we have high status, high prestige, we can attract better mates, or at the very least attract the resources to allow us to attract better mates, right? So that's why the power hierarchies exist. is for people, the degree to which you can rise up a power hierarchy is the degree to which you have more control over situations which give you better access to the resources to make you a more effective reproducer. This is why these power hierarchies are so ubiquitous. So if the postmodernists were to acknowledge this, were to move beyond their proximate explanations and move to the ultimate explanation of biology, then they could turn to Peterson and they can say that, well, but these competency hierarchies, they're really just power hierarchies, right? I mean, why would anyone pursue elite competence in anything? Right? I mean, why would you do that? Right? I mean, that just makes for a hard life, right? I mean, you have high investment of your time, of your energy. Often you have to have an investment of resources. You risk reputational ruin, right? I mean, you could strive for greatness and fail badly and end up looking bad, right? So there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of cost in pursuing elite competence. So why would anyone bother to do it? Because it provides enhanced social prestige and high social status. It's part of the same story. And so when you see it that way, when you see it from the sort of ultimate explanation of biology, these competence hierarchies that Peter's talking about are not different than power hierarchies. They may have slightly different dynamics, but they have the same ultimate purpose. Right? Like everything, they're about increasing our capacity to be able to be effective reproducers, which is what we're evolved to do. So this is where I think that Peterson's response to the postmodernists falls short, right? By only answering them at this proximate level. First of all, he leaves it open for them to challenge the idea that these competence hierarchies are not power hierarchies, because ultimately they are. And the postmodernists would be right to say that. But by not pushing the conflict and forcing them to explain why these power hierarchies exist, he's not pushing them to that ultimate level of explanation, which is the biological level. And that's where they have to be pushed, because they're right. Everything's a power hierarchy if you define it that way. Everything is. But only because of our evolved biology that makes us do what we can do within our power, and to the degree we can increase our power to do what we can do to enhance our reproductive success, including things like pursuing high levels of competence, gaining the great social prestige of being recognized as elite competent in some area. Right? But by failing to push this, then Peterson is failing to force the postmodernists to acknowledge that the only way they can sustain their argument is by granting the ultimate explanation of evolutionary biology. And of course, that they don't want to do, right? Because their whole shtick is about the fact that there's no master narratives. But there is a master narrative, right? There is a master narrative that explains human nature and human behavior. And their failure to acknowledge that is the weak spot in their critique of power. And of course, if they were to embrace biology, of course, all that sort of cultural Marxism stuff that they snuck in the back door would all fall apart too. Right? I mean, if you acknowledge that biology is the foundation of everything, then they would have to acknowledge the existence, the biological, the genetic existence of race. They would have to acknowledge the existence of average racial differences in things like intelligence, general intelligence. They'd have to acknowledge the existence of sexual dimorphism. Right? They kind of continue to suggest, to claim that any difference in outcomes between the sexes, has to be explained in terms of some kind of discrimination. It could be nothing more than the different psychological manifestations of sexual dimorphism, resulting from like 1 billion years of evolutionary selective pressures acting upon sex, right? And this whole and all this stuff about about gender, this which has become the real new hobby horse, right? The concept of gender has changed now, right? There used to be a time when what gender referred to was the degree of masculineness or feminineness that any particular man or woman had on sort of a spectrum, right? Um, which we now know has to do with the balance of hormones, what balance of hormones you actually have. You can when transsexuals, people who are say women who are changing to become men, start receiving shots of testosterone, there's very real differences that they experience, including much higher levels of libido as a consequence of this. So we know that the gender in this old sense has to do with with the particular hormones that your own phenotype has, right? But now gender's taken on this other whole meaning, right? This whole non-binary gender, right? There's these other things that don't fit into the male-female binary, right? But there's no, I'm prepared to be corrected on this, and if someone wants to, I'm interested to hear it. But as far as I understand, there's no evolutionary or biological basis to non-binary gender. This is just someone's subjective desire or identity or fantasy, right? But all this would have to be abandoned by the postmodernists if they were to acknowledge that in fact their whole claim about power hierarchies is underpinned and dependent upon the fact that in fact evolutionary biology is the sort of the mass discourse, the underpinning explanation for why these hierarchies of power, if we're going to call them that, in fact exist, and why Peterson's critique in terms of the proximate level of claiming, well, there's competence hierarchies and power hierarchies, why this is really an insufficient response. So in this way, and like I said, it's not that I'm saying that all of Peterson's critique of postmodernism is wrong. I don't think it is. But on this level, and a point that he frequently makes, I think he's making an intellectual error. And if he knows what he's doing, I think he's making a tactical error. Because I think the issue here is to really push the postmodernists to recognize that the only way that you can ultimately underpin your claims, if you can't underpin your claims that everything's power hierarchy, then your claim falls apart. That's what it means to have no foundation, right? It just it's nothing to your opinion. Why do I care about your opinion? If there's a foundation, what's the foundation? The foundation is biology. And then they would have to deal with the implications that come with that. And so I think that Peter's missing the opportunity to really bring to bear the contradiction in the thinking of postmodernists and bring the conflict to light. Anyways, that's it. Thought I'd share that. I hope you find that of some interest. Maybe if Jordan's out there listening, he might consider rethinking the tactic. Anyways, like, share. I'd appreciate it. Look forward to hearing your comments. Catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.